You know, I made a movie with him.
Oh!
And I never heard this, but this is not about me.
Yeah.
All right. So you get with Thomas,
Right.
and you worked with him for a number of years.
Hardest
And
years
what
of
was
my-
that like?
Oh,
Why was it hard?
he was a tough taskmaster. He was something to work for. Reminded me of my father in many ways. You could not show up to work a minute late. It was like it was a hard place to survive.
Yeah.
But my work ethic and my father, my background, had prepared me for him, and he was different. He was different. Very bright, but he was not necessarily the warmest person that you could really warm to. You had to earn your trust with him. And I started out as his press secretary, ended up writing speeches for him. But once I earned his trust, I traveled with him 80% of the time. And we bonded. And so that was a phenomenal part of my life because I learned a lot about the inner workings of government. In fact, I had Senator Thurman to swear him in, and he was able to get a lot done. Thurman sort of became like the champion for EEOC on a lot of things that they were trying to do. And it was 4 years, four enjoyable years. And I stayed there with him until my father became ill. And I brought my father to DC in '85 because I didn't want that burden on my mother to take care of him. He had myeloma, bone cancer, because my father had just attended Ronald Reagan's inauguration in that January. And because he was so thrilled that Reagan won. And so we celebrated. I rented a limousine and all that, and had I was showing out. I wanted my father to feel I was big time. Strom Thurmond hosted a dinner party for us, and but later that year he became ill, and I was so devastated by his death. I was just so devastated that I needed a break from DC. So I told the justice, but the justice was very kind to me during that period because my father was in the hospital for about 4 months. And I probably saw EEOC 3 days out of those 4 months. I was always by his bedside taking care of him. And when he died, I moved to High Point, North Carolina to start a different life.
To work for Bob
Bob Brown, that's right.
Yes, now describe Bob Brown,
Oh.
because many people watching this won't know.
Bob Brown was the person that Ronald Reagan wanted as ambassador to South Africa before Edward Perkins became the ambassador. But Mr. Brown decided against it. Mr. Brown worked in the Nixon administration. He and Art Fletcher built the minority set-aside programs. They're the ones that put the new version of affirmative action in place and minority business enterprise. Bob Brown is one of the most revered Republicans in this country. He has built a successful international public relations firm, and I don't know if you remember when Mr. Mandela was in Porsmore, Mr. Brown was the first American to visit him in Porsmore. And Mr. Mandela asked him, could he find a way to finance his children's education here in the United States? And Mr. Brown was able to get them scholarships through Dr. Silver at the time, who was president of Boston University. And they came here under his stewardship, and he took care of them. And so he was very involved with the Mandela family. And one of my assignments, when I was with Mr. Brown, I became Vice President of Government and International Affairs. I spent a lot of time in South Africa with Winnie Mandela, with the movement, spent a lot of times going back and forth with his adult daughter and the grandkids back and forth to South Africa. It's where I first traveled internationally, was through Mr. Brown. So it opened my world up to international travels. I built a very good relationship with Mrs. Mandela. And when Mr. Mandela was freed from Porsmore, I think it was 1990 and 1991, he personally asked me, would I work in their office to respond to all the letters that were coming in. And I remember the letters from Gorbachev, F. Kennedy. I was typing and writing all those letters, and they were signing them. And it may surprise people, you know, that I had that experience, but it was wonderful. And I'll never forget the first interview that Mr. Mandela gave after coming out was with he and Winnie, and I had the interview. And I remember people there like Chris Wallace and others who could not get in because they were the wrong color, to be honest with you.
Yeah.
And I gave them my blessings, and Mr. Mandela allowed them to interview. So it was a fascinating time. I was there for about a month after he was released.
Now, back to Bob Brown. Now, is it fair to say that the experience with Bob Brown introduces you to public relations as a profession?
Yes, it does.
And that led to your association with Stedman.
Well, what happened was, that's good. Oprah was looking for something for Stedman. Her man needed credibility, not that he's just her beau. And so Dr. Maya Angelou and Oprah are best friends. Well, Dr. Angelou is like her mother. And so in High Point, well, Oprah came to High Point at Winston-Salem because Dr. Angelo felt she had the perfect situation for Stedman. Because Oprah wanted him in a situation where he would not be exploited, which would further exploit her, putting him in an environment where he could learn and grow and develop as a professional. So they had this dinner, and it worked out where that Stedman would come and work for BNC Associates. So, so Stedman and I was on board a few months before Stedman. So Stedman came on board as vice president of business development, and that's how we met. And we both learned the field of professional public relations, the field of marketing, crisis management, crisis public relations. In fact, every time that I was in South Africa, Stedman, he was with us. In fact, it's because of this relationship that Oprah set up the feeding program in South Africa and building this academy in South Africa. All this came from this relationship with Mr. Brown. And so Stedman and I decided, well, Oprah used, and then I ended up running Oprah's foundation. There was the Oprah Winfrey Foundation, charitable givings. I was its first executive director, and I ran her foundation for a little over a year and giving away money, working with different philanthropic organizations. And so Stedman and I decided in late 1989 and 1990 that we should use the skills and the gifts that we learned from Mr. Brown to start our own public relations firm. So we went into business together and founded the Grant Williams Group.
And very quickly, because I want to get into some other kinds of questions, the Thomas Supreme Court nomination is a point in which you become publicly known.
Yes.
Because of your support of him and your appearances on TV and in the media.
Well, Nita and I worked together.
Okay.
We were all there together at EEOC.
Yeah.
And so when Thomas was nominated by Bush to the Supreme Court, we handled much of his public relations and advising him. And so when Thomas eventually was elected to the Supreme Court, because I think he was elected, not opponent, you know, the victor gets all the benefits, but those that supported him get some benefits too. So I started writing for USA Today. Kathy Hughes offered me a radio show on WOL, which was from week to twice and 5 days a week. And that's how I came to the attention of the public, was through those hearings and being there for my mentor, Justice Thomas.
Now, I don't think of you, Armstrong, as a journalist, because I think of a journalist as someone writing for the daily press who's reporting news. I think of you as a commentator. How do you think of yourself?
Well, after No Child Left Behind, you would think that I was a journalist, but...
Well, no,
I'm not a journalist.
Yeah.
You know what? I have no professional training as a journalist. I did not go to school for journalism. It wasn't until Thomas was nominated to the Supreme Court that I became a commentator, a writing commentary, doing radio. I'm a commentator. I'm not a journalist.
So when you have to fill out a form and says profession, what do you write there?
Conservative commentator.
Conservative commentator,
Yes.
not just commentator, but conservative commentator.
Oh, I'm a conservative commentator.
Okay.
Yes.
All right.
That doesn't surprise me,
now,
of course.
whether you do or not, at some point you have to say to yourself, and maybe it's not verbalized,